I'd like to welcome you all and thank you so much for coming out on this rainy evening to help me greet Simon O'Neill and to ask him a few questions and to get some insight about what it means to be, according to the London Guardian, one of the 5 great emerging heldentenors over the last decade. I'd just like to read a little bit of Simon's bio. It's very impressive, and there's too much in it for me to really memorize, so you'll pardon my reading. He has established himself as one of the finest heldentenors on the international scene. He's principal artist at the Metropolitan Opera, where he's just finishing a run of the Drum Major in Wozzeck. He's sung at the Royal Opera House Covent Garden, Teatro alla Scala, Bayreuth, and Salzburg festivals, and has appeared with many illustrious conductors, not the least of whom James Levine, Riccardo Muti, Gergiev, Anthony Pappano, Daniel Barenboim, Pierre Boulez, Macaris, Sir Colin Davis. And I'll make a note of his appearances as Siegmund in Walküre, Royal Opera House Covent Garden, Teatro alla Scala, Berlin Staatsoper with Barenboim, the Met in both the Otto Schenk production and the Lepage. If that weren't enough, the scope and variety of our singers' repertory really astonishes when you think that he also, not too far in the distant past, sang Tamino, sings my favorite work, one of them, the Glagolitic or Slavonic Mass, wonderful piece, Chairman Mao in Nixon in China. Many, and finally, on this list anyway, Sergei in Shostakovich, Lady Macbeth of Mtsensk. So that is quite a lineup. Since Natalie made our intro for us, in that we saw one another in the Bayreuth cantina or cafeteria the last time, maybe we can talk a bit about Bayreuth. You have that first on your list here. Maybe you can tell us a bit how you got your start there and what it means to you.
Sure. First of all, thanks so much for coming out on this very chilly, wet night. I think tomorrow's going to be nicer, I hope. But I appreciate it very much. It gives me a great joy to speak to the New York Wagner Society. It's also extremely terrifying to be in a room of so many Wagner scholars and great musicians of New York. As a preface as well, when Scott and I had a lunch to decide how we would run tonight, rather than just a recital, which would have been a great honor as well, or an interview, I thought that we could make it a little mixed up, slightly more casual, with some singing as well, talking about technical issues from the training to be a young Wagner singer. I hope you'll find that interesting. Some weeks ago, I thought it was a great idea that I would play the piano myself and sing. But yesterday at the Met, I was so terrified that I went there for 3 hours this afternoon and sat down and practiced all the piano accompaniments to the point of absolute frenzy of worriedness. Anyway, I love playing the piano, but I have to tell you, I'm not a pianist. But so anyway, it's going to be hopefully a casual look at, and I hope you can look at it like that. Scott and I met in Bayreuth in 2009 or 10, I think it might have been 9. 10 it was. And it was the first year of the Hans Neuenfels Lohengrin. You know, the Bayreuth chorus, like the Met chorus here, and like the Covent Garden chorus, these choruses are incredible support to a young artist making their debut on that stage, because it has an incredible feeling, I felt, of positivity to the singer and wanting you to do well. And that was really, really great. And of course in Bayreuth that you have the lovely Hefeweizen beer on tap. So when it's hot, it's in the middle of summer, so you do become socially acquainted quite quickly. And Scott and I immediately became friends, and it was great. So that's how we actually met. But I guess Bayreuth, we're going to start it there, and then we might go back a little bit. But you know, I got an audition, and I got the audition through Sir Donald McIntyre, who is my countryman, my mentor, and my teacher of this Wagner repertoire. And he called up his friend Wolfgang Wagner. That was a good friend to have. And said, I have this young tenor. I would love him to audition for the new production of the Ring Cycle. I'm going to play as well while I talk. But the new production, new Ring Cycle of 2006, I think it was, or 5 it might have been. They were auditioning for a small part of Frau. It's a lovely part because Frau is often sung by a tenor who's starting, or Siegfried when he wants to have a night of an extra fee and just not much singing. Well, this was the first occurrence of that. So I turned up there at the Bayreuth to audition Frau. Here's the little bit that I sang. Well, great. Then we get into the nice D-flat major section, which goes into Wotan's Abendliche, that great moment. Well, the hardest bit for that phrase, those glorious strings, G-flat 6th chord at the top, is getting out the low D-flat at the bottom, which is really low in a tenor voice. Well, Sir Donald McIntyre, I'm sorry, with the poor lovely lady on the controls, she's going to be turning my mic up and down all the time. But to articulate that bottom D flat, took a lot of training, and we'll talk a bit about that. I'm a ex-baritone, so thankfully I still have a bit of that range. But I spent a long time with Sir Donald on working through his technique of singing Wagner, which was always on top of the note and ready in the mouth before the actual tone is ready to be sung. Therefore, all consonant clusters early, even if it's a one sound, must be early, just before the orchestra. What that does is it tricks the listener into thinking they've got a really big voice, because you hear this just before the chord, and you think, oh, I can hear that tenor. Anyway, it's a great trick. So when that 2 bars earlier, and then when you get up to Brücke and stuff, you can show your tenor resume a bit better. Oh, excuse me, sorry, getting caught up on the Steinway. So I guess tonight we'll just do it like that. I'll just talk about all the little ins and outs of making some of these roles and what it meant. That audition, Scott, was with Wolfgang Wagner himself, the late Wolfgang Wagner, the late Gertrude Wagner, and Christian Thielemann. Usually in Bayreuth for auditions of the lead parts, no one else is allowed in the room, but Sir Don was allowed in the room. And I could see Sir Donald McIntyre with his lovely white hair and his white beard at the very top of the Festspiele house as I did this audition. And I sang my Frau, and then from the stage in German, Mr. Wagner asked me to sing some Parsifal, which I'd prepared as well. I immediately stood up and said, "Jawohl, Herr Wagner." I had very, very limited German back then. And "Jawohl, Herr Wagner" was said with such urgency that it unfortunately had slight ripples of the mid-30s. it brings me back to Sir Donald McIntyre's audition there. He had no German at all, and just said, "Ja." He was auditioning for the part of the Heerrufer in Wagner's Lohengrin, the opening baritone part. It's a great part. But prepared for the audition, the part of Telramund. He sang Telramund so well that the story goes that Wolfgang Wagner called him aside, and Don just kept on saying, "Ja, ja, ja." And to punish him for saying this, gave him the role of Telramund in 1967. So that was how Sir Don got his first audition at the Bayreuth. My audition that day, that first day, went on because then Christian Thielemann said, "Simon, could you sing some Lohengrin for us?" I immediately said, "Absolutely, maestro. I'm very sorry, though, in English, I did not bring the score." To this, there was some sniggles from the audience, and they said, "My dear boy, you're in Bayreuth. We'll get you the autograph if you wish." And I went on to sing a little bit of Lohengrin, you know, and that start of Lohengrin, which was also the very first thing I got to sing with the Bayreuth Orchestra with Scott, and the A major section, the high strings. Terrifying to try and start to sing this.
Nun sei bedankt, mein lieber Schwan, zieh durch die weite Flut zurück, dahin, wohin mich trug dein Kahn, kehr wieder nur zu unserem Glück, drum sei getreu dein Dienst getan. Leb wohl, mein lieber Schwan.
And then one of the most beautiful choruses. I'll just cut to the end of that. Trumpets.
Heil, König Heinrich, segenvoll, mög Gott bei deinem Schwerte stehen, ruhmreich und groß, dein Name soll von dieser Erde nie vergehen.
Well, I have to tell you, I was unsuccessful at the audition.
Sure about that.
I was unsuccessful at the audition. I went back to Bayreuth 3 further times to audition for the part of title role of Parsifal, and then in 2007 I went and auditioned the part of Lohengrin for the new production that Scott was in as well. And on that occasion, I was singing the ring cycle in Covent Garden with Antonio Papano and Sir John Tomlinson. I was double cast with Placido Domingo. I couldn't believe where I was. It was fantastic. We'll talk a bit about that later. But that audition, I sang very poorly and stopped halfway through and said, "I'm sorry for wasting your time. I was in not good shape." But I think they respected that, and they had me come back three weeks later, and then I sang a pretty good audition of the Lohengrin and got cast in the Lohengrin, and then got cast as Jonas Kaufmann's cover for the Lohengrin, which was great. And Jonas and I are great friends. We have very different voices. I look at the way he sings, let alone his handsomeness and his gloriousness on stage. It's for any tenor to be highly upset with. But the way he sings is so amazing, something I can't do. But we'll talk a wee bit about that later on, just the general taste in tenor singing over the years, I guess. And so that's how it started.
Well, you know, it's very tough to interview a guest who's so withdrawn. It's very hard work, Simon, to get you to open up. No, it's an absolute treat for us. Speaking of Lohengrin and this very difficult part, the entrance there that you just sung, I think you once said that it's 3 taminos. Can you explain
Yes.
a little bit what that means sort of technically and what you have to do to get yourself
Yeah.
lined up in that part of the voice? Which
Yeah,
is
sure.
tricky.
I mean, the start on that A major section, I always cheat when I do this. I slightly sing upstage because you want to have it lovely and dolce sound. You want to have a sweetness to the sound of Lohengrin bidding farewell to his taxi, be that of the Swan. And some people can have a nice French mix on that tone, even a falsetto somewhat. I find it hard to do that personally, so I always cheat a little bit. Nothing wrong with that. The great Franco Corelli was the master of that, and because his voice was so glorious and huge that he would often sing to the side or up. But say the tamino question. When I first went to Sir Donald McIntyre, the first thing he asked, he said, "Simon, sing me something German." So I turned up, and I was preparing at the Juilliard School.
Dies Bildnis ist bezaubernd schön, wie noch kein Auge je gesehen.
And so on. I mean, I love singing that role, but and in the past, many of what's called the young heldentenor would be singing tamino. It's back in the day, Vince Gusson, Franz Völker, all these great tenors, that's what they did. They also sang Wagner as well as a lot of these Mozartian roles. So for me, I see no difference in singing tamino than singing Lohengrin, from a technical point of view. There's the odd moment in Lohengrin where you bring some dramatic aspect to a phrase, a higher note possibly, but there are moments of tamino, second act tamino, Die Weisheitslieder dieser Knaben, this lovely dramatic accompanied recitative into one of the most difficult arias, the flute aria. That is just like Lohengrin. It's in the same area of the voice. It needs somewhat a technical discipline. I talk these things. Do you think I actually end up doing them? No, I don't. I fail terribly often. But you know, that's my goal. You know, with the tamino aspect of.
Oops.
It's going to get me every time.
Maybe we could move that tripod, perhaps. Yeah, there's certainly no place to hide in tamino or
No.
the opening of a Lohengrin. I'm often curious, this is one of my favorite questions, what goes through your mind 20 seconds before your first vocal entrance?
Well, I can tell you that my debut as Florestan in Fidelio at the Royal Opera House on the same stage that John Vickers had sung the role, and as it comes through, the orchestra started playing the big F minor. All in the dark. Of course, you were a second act Fidelio, you're a prisoner in the dark. 20 seconds before, well, I can tell you, Scott, 2 seconds before, I had no idea what my opening words were. Of this very famous aria, I was that terrified. And as I heard, Borum, Pidum, Pidum, Boridum. And as that diminished phrase went down, I looked out at the Royal Opera House Covent Garden, and I was thinking, my wife was in the thing, I thought, oh, Carmel, her name. I thought, Carmel can't see me. Forgive me, it's so bloody dark here. Immediately, Gott, welch dunkel hier is the opening line. And that's a true story. So when we go, wah, da, da, da,
Welch dunkel hier, grauenvolle Stille. Öd ist es mich hier, nichts lebet außer mir. O schwere Prüfung, doch gerecht ist Gottes Wille. Ich murre nicht, das Maß der Leiden steht bei dir.
Such a lovely opening, that start of that, but terrifying as well. Don't hurt. You'll just get sore hands at the end of it. I will only accept booze from now on. So I guess that happened with that. With Wagner particularly, it's a terrifying opening, the Lohengrin, because it's so exposed. It needs such a beauty of sound. You know, we can talk about sound and voices later, you know. I'm one of the singers that I don't like the sound of my voice at all. I like sometimes what I do with it. From a technical point of view, I can look back and think, well, technically I think you did that well, but I just wish I had a voice like, I don't know, there's heaps of people out there. It's, yeah, 20 seconds before the show, you know, usually with Zygmunt, you're running across the stage, you know, so you got things to do sometimes.
That's
you have to shoot a swan and Parsifal,
Right.
you know.
Right. Well, I think after that the lights went on after your rendition of Gott will dunkel here. I'm curious, when we come to things technical, you started as baritone. Many heldentenors do. In fact, most, I would say. It's safe to say. I love this quote. It's from Donna Vaughn, who's a voice teacher at Manhattan School. And she said, the three most frightening things a young singer will do in his life are getting married, signing a mortgage, and switching from baritone to tenor.
Yep.
And I gathered that yours wasn't really necessarily an abrupt switch, but is it a matter of your just having kept your early roots, the sort of chest roots, or did you have to really, how long did it take you to smooth out your voice so that you had that great top and then could work freely in the middle?
Scott, it took me a long time. I was a baritone with some potential, I guess, as a young 23, 24-year-old, singing all the lovely Donizetti arias, Bella siccome un angelo. But once you're a baritone and you start singing things like Piero's Tanzlied from Die Todesstadt, or even Largo fa tutto della città from Barbiere, to sing those you need a facility up in the upper ends of the voice. I was in New Zealand. You know, I went to school in the South Island of New Zealand. I auditioned. As a little backstory on the baritone nature, I mean, I never got into the university. I auditioned for singing, but I never got in, so I did my first degrees in conducting and in tuba playing. I played the tuba for 14 years.
And that was to help with your asthma, right?
That was,
one of the
yes.
reasons
I had asthma, and my parents sent me to swim, to learn to swim, and to play an instrument, a brass instrument. I had a choice. My father, I remember at the age of 7, 8, he took me to a pipe band, and I played on the chanter one night and thought, well, he can join the pipe band. And then the next night he took me to the brass band. Now, New Zealand has a big culture of brass bands, like Germany somewhat, and like Yorkshire, like Northern England. Whilst in America here we're more about the military band or wind bands, these are purely brass or the Yorkshire minor things. And that was my life, and that's really where I fell in love with the brass. And of course, any self-respecting brassman loves Wagner because of that. But the change from baritone to tenor, any singer, you love singing lead. The leader is a big aspect, and listening to things like Fisher Disco and Thomas Hampson and these great singers singing the leader. I didn't have a very good top as a baritone, but at the age of 24, I thought, I think I can be a tenor. So I sang, I remember one weekend, the bass solos in The Messiah. I was...
Thus saith the Lord of hosts.
and that week later, I sang... It was the evangelist in the Christmas oratorio. Both would have been absolutely terrible, I'm sure, but that happened over a week. And I thought, well, I can do this sort of quasi-Frenchy fake stuff on top to be the tenor. And then a lovely lady called Virginia Tsiani, one of the great divas of this country and of her home Romania and in Italy, came to New Zealand and did some master classes. And I met Virginia Tsiani, and she said, let's try and get you to sing some tenor stuff. So my first tenor arias was E la solita storia del pastore from Chile's La Rosiana. We all love that as tenors. And of course, as baritones, trying to be tenors, that was, I just put it in my nose, to tell the truth. It was god-awful sound for some years. I've always had a resonance here, even though my speaking voice is like a pirate somewhat. This is New Zealand, but I somewhat have a very forward-placing voice. I apologize for that. It's like someone just putting their finger into the bone on your arm. But my singing went in this manner too. And by the time I got to Donna Vaughan's class at Manhattan School, I was starting to come out of this rather brittle tenorial technique. I still have brittleness in my voice. That's the instrument. That's part of the stuff I don't like about it. I wish it was far more warmer. This is my, I'm 42 now, Scott, so I know that over these 40s, I'm going to just warm my voice as much as I can, and I'm doing that with the new roles, and when I'm, in a few years, hopefully we'll have it warm enough to sing, the great roles like Tristan and such. One hopes, I hope. So that's a work in progress.
Yes.
Yeah.
And let me ask you another bit of a technical question. Did you ever play around with your falsetto as a baritone and wonder what that is and why can't I connect it to my real voice? Did that ever play a role for you, or were you ever...
Yeah, I had a good falsetto as a baritone, but as time has gone on and I've put so much chest voice into my singing of the tenor repertoire now, unfortunately my falsetto now is nearly sort of exhausted itself. We might talk a wee bit about the technical aspects of some of that later. But as a baritone I loved being a baritone. But I have to tell you that singing this Helden tenor repertoire, or this German repertoire generally, is just the greatest joy and the greatest honor, I think, yeah.
That's terrific. I think it's safe to say that the old saw about tenors not being intelligent doesn't apply here. Certainly, it's obviously an enormous amount of
it's
thought.
not that. I do love it. I love music. I absolutely love it. The start for Wagner for me was in the brass band too, but also as an altar boy at my little Catholic. I hated being an altar boy. Absolutely loathed it. So to get out of being an altar boy, I asked if I could learn the organ, to play the organ. So I was sub-organist here in the city. It would help me go through Manhattan School and Juilliard down at Old St. Pat's in Soho. And so I loved playing the organ. And to have a huge instrument like that, I thought, well, I want to have a singing instrument like that too. So it's funny how it all happens, really.
Yeah.
And it was never supposed to be. New Zealand has a nice choir culture, like America and like Wales. So I was second bass in the choir and got to sing with Peter Schreier, the great German leader singer, came down and we sang Christmas Oratorio, and I was in the choir for that as a bass. And from then I went into tenor in my late 20s. This is where I'd like to make a comment on general tenorial singing, what I have found in your 20s. Usually, and we do see this with the fantastic young artists that we see, particularly at the Met and these places, you see these wunderkinds of 21, 22, 23. And I always say to them, you can do it there because you're a bit like Parsifal. You're Reinator. You sort of just do it. But by 27, 28, when the instrument and the actual physical nature of the voice is actually settling, often some of these guys get into trouble. I was a wee bit earlier getting into trouble, so by 27, 28 I was sort of coming out of it. I feel for that in the way now of how careers go, that it's sometimes it's a hard position for those young tenors to be in, particularly a tenor with a larger voice who often, all through their 20s gets told, oh no, you shouldn't do that, it's too big, it's too big, it's too big. I have to tell you, I'm not a proponent of that. I think you should, if you want to start, and you love singing Siegmund, there's no reason why you should not start working on Siegmund. You don't have to go and take it out and sing it in public everywhere, but it's going to take a fair while to learn that thing well. As a little aside on my thoughts on tenorial singing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you ever fear for young singers who tackle Siegmund and Parsifal because they don't have a top? Often we see that they'll come in with the Winterstürme and other low-lying arias, and then you wonder, what's the rest of the voice like?
Siegmund is a peculiar role because it's a lower role, and we're going to I'll do a wee bit of singing of the Siegmund. I love singing that role very much. Now, my ideal of Siegmund is the pre-war German tenors, Danish tenors particularly, Helge Roswanger, who only sang once in Bayreuth, but Franz Völker, or even after the war, Windgassen. These, Fritz Wunderlich, who didn't sing Siegmund, but that sort of ideal is what I love very much, that sort of singing. Then you have the voices that are they were natural peculiarities, like Melchior, with that such incredible burnished baritone that it's very hard for anyone else to sort of emulate. And he could extend it right to the top. I mean, it was extraordinary. If I have to choose, Max Lorenz is a voice that I just think is just phenomenal. So I say these when I sometimes do some teaching of students and people bring Wagner repertoire or German repertoire to me. I often talk about these earlier tenors because you can sing Winterstürme as a baritone, but by the end of Act 1 of Siegmund, you have to have a technical mind because you have to articulate a high A there for Wälsung und Blut. And it's passionate, and you're on stage with Debbie Voigt or Eva Maria Westbrook, and you're in love with these women anyway, on and off stage, and it's all going, but you need to have a technical discipline of that. I mean, if I can just show you a little bit of that Valkyrie start. The start of the roll,
Was wird dies auch sei, hier muss ich rasten.
I wish I had far more baritone in my voice that I could make that sound more burnished. But it is what it is. You know, you have to work with what you're given. But by the time you get into the big third scene, I don't know, last year I had the honour of singing in the Lepage Ring at the Met, and on the opening night, international broadcast, opening matinee, I was sick, very sick, and I couldn't phonate, and I was terrified, and I got up at 5:30 that morning to try and get my voice going. I filled myself up on antibiotics and the I was going to say Prozac, no, not Prozac. I should have had that too. Prednisone and all these various things. And Mr. Gulp came in and said, just give it your best. Well, I sang for 25 minutes, and I knew after that, like Placido had done only a few years earlier when he wasn't well, he walked off stage, it was the right thing to do, and my cover went on. But this aria shows that you have a lower part of the tenor voice, but also you need to have your passaggio, that higher part, sorted. I mean, the start is so great. Oh.
Waffenlos fiel ich in Feindes Haus. Seiner Rachepfand raste ich hier. Ein Weib sah ich, wonnig und hehr. Entzückend bangen ziert mein Herz, zu der mich nun Sehnsucht zieht, die mit süßen Zauber mich klärt. Im Traum hält sie der Mann, der mich wehrlosen hält.
Sing those notes usually, your head's in a wee bit of a rush, but, and if you're doing them properly, and you're at the Metropolitan Opera, you know, and you're on your knees and you think, I'll give it my all, and I tried my hardest and I love doing that, but your head does get in a rush. And then you have to just curtail it in very quickly for this moment of describing the light behind you, very low in the voice.
Was gleißt dort hell im Glimmerschein?
Like a leader.
Welch ein Strahl bricht aus dem Eschestamm. Des blinden Auge leuchtet ein Blitz, lustig lacht da der Blick.
And then by the end of the act, you go through those glorious moments with Sieglinde after the Winterstürme and after the Du bist der Lenz and stuff, and you know, to be on stage and you see Eva Maria Westbrook there in all gloriousness singing Du bist der Lenz, and you get to sing.
Im Lenzes Mond leuchtest du hell.
Rub your hands through her hair.
Hier umhebt dich das Wellenhaar, was mich verrückt, errat ich nun leicht, denn wonnig weidet mein Blick.
So you have those lovely romantic moments, but at the very end of that act, you have some serious singing to do. You have mid-range stuff here. Now, Scott, that's really low in the voice when you're already singing high and quite powerful. And if you press too much on that I say to the young singers, because they will sometimes they're a faux baritonal. And if you do that too much, it'll take a toll on you, particularly by the second act, which is big orchestrally. I mean, it's not that there are too many brass playing at the moment, but there's an expanse in the orchestra on that C minor phrase. I have a little story on that moment, which we'll talk about Daniel Barenboim soon, but as I started singing this in Berlin, that phrase, it was with Daniel Barenboim and the East-West Divan Orchestra in an outdoor stadium called the Waldbühne in Olympic Park in Berlin, and with Waltraud Meyer here and Sir John Tomlinson here and Daniel Barenboim there. And as I'm singing that phrase in the Waldbühne, I mean, this comes with history of peculiar and pretty nasty history of Berlin, built in the 30s. I had a cold shiver down my spine singing that minor sixth. Heiligster Min. I thought, looked to my side, and I have arguably the most famous Jewish conductor of the last however many years beside me, an orchestra full of young Israelis and Palestinians, Arabs, some Christians, and I'm singing this phrase was built as a Nazi shrine. So it was it just absolutely freaked me out for a little bit, I have to tell you, Scott, that moment. But then at the end of that, Zygmunt, when they have decided that they are in love, and she is going to say, by the way, I'm also your twin sister, he says, great. Articulate that high A, I feel that's where tenor singing comes in, a technical aspect of singing. It shouldn't just be pop it out of like some lucky note. It's an important motive moment of the ring, of that, and it's only an A, but it's a high A in the context of the rest of the role that you've sung that night, and it's if you know some pages earlier if it's going to be good or not. I remember, I used to love singing Rodolfo, and boy, you knew on the phrase "Talor dal mio forziere," you knew on that E flat to A flat moment if your La Speranza was going to be very good on the high C, and if it wasn't very good, you had a really hard minute and a half to try and get through it. So the same thing there with the Wagner side. And so anyway, I don't know if I answered the question about young singers, but we all have our taste, and my taste is, Placido singing this I just love because he sounds with that tenorial brilliance of the Zygmunt, and plus this baritonal bronzeness, I guess.
Yeah, it's super. What a wonderful explanation of the process of singing this material. How much do you, just to finish up maybe with the technical aspects, what portion of your mind is still devoted in the moment to technique on stage, and how much is simply so much in the muscle memory?
Yeah.
Or does it vary depending on your vocal condition? And maybe you could go into that.
Yeah, generally, I mean, I remember reading Jussi Björling's book by his wife called Jussi, and she says on that there was a stage when Jussi Björling was constantly warmed up. He just felt that he could sing at any time of the night. And I'm sure that was the gin as well. But I tried that technique by just dosing myself in gin. It did not make me a better singer, Scott. I thought I was better. But I feel now with this Wagner singing that I'm often just constantly warmed up. I'm constantly ready to go, pretty much, generally. I don't do much of a warm-up in the morning. Most of these Wagner roles, they're written in such a way that you warm up in the role. A lot of operas like that. You don't, it's the old, you don't want to leave your voice in the dressing room, is the old saying, of course. I don't know, what was the guy?
Well, just, I think you answered it. Yeah. At this point in your career, you feel like you're just sort of on what they call perma-warm, and it doesn't take a lot of vocalizing or working in the dressing room to get your voice where you want it to be.
Well, that's me personally. I mean, I sit there and play the piano for hours before, and on the subway, taking the one train down or something, I'll be humming away like any normal New Yorker. Of course, I do the same thing in London and New Zealand, and people look at me, boy, that's a strange fellow. But in New York, at least, it's normal to do that sort of thing. It's great.
Thank you.
There are many ways to skin the cat in the end. There's not one way of singing this thing. I just want to have people to... I still study with my lovely teacher, Marlena Mullis, up there on 104th Street, who we sing this... I just think it's... She hasn't heard my voice. She's made my voice into an instrument that gets employed at these wonderful places. So I'm very happy about that.
I just had a very good question. It ties in a bit to what you've just spoken about, and that is the future and your future plans. And when we spoke at lunch, you were talking about heading in the direction of Siegfried, perhaps someday. Yes. Yeah. They have the really heavy roles. Maybe Tristan.
Yeah, well,
What do you see in your future that way, and is something booked at this point?
Yeah, I've got some things on the go. I've got some things contracted, actually. I'm going to do a Götterdämmerung in Houston with Patrick Summers. I'm going to get a great honour to sing Siegmund in the Walküre, and then to sing the Götterdämmerung. And of course, that's going to be with Christine Goerke, and it's. I think we're going to look good up on stage. What a tour de force that woman is. So that is my things that I'm working on now, the two roles of Siegfried and Tannhäuser. I've always sort of sidestepped Tannhäuser because it's a very, very difficult role. I did get offered that at Bayreuth and turned it down. And that was, I hate doing that. You have to bite your tongue when you do those sort of things. But I knew it was the right thing at the time. But Siegfried particularly, when I recorded my little CD there, I think the most stuff that I'm proud of most is the Siegfried singing. I feel that my voice has height in it, and if I keep myself healthy and trim down a bit, all those sort of things that I hear all the time when I walk into Lincoln Centre, I'll hopefully be able to sing that. But it's taken the time now. I mean, I'm working the role every day. I will sing through part of the first act. And of course, having a taskmaster like Sir Donald McIntyre he really does crack the whip. He's very hard in the studio. I often play the piano for some of his other singers, and those poor people just leave shaking wrecks sometimes because Don can do it, and not many other people can do it like that. It's quite extraordinary.
And you have no concerns that it's a one-way street.
Well, my manager and I,
into the heavy material.
Once you start doing Siegfried, generally they don't look at you for Siegmund. And I love Siegmund. I love it. I talked to Jonas about this. We just love singing that thing. It's great. And then once you do Siegfried, if you can phonate Siegfried and phonate it well, you pretty much will get work. That's how it sort of goes. I mean, you just need to go in there and start singing, and then just keep on singing and finish singing. And if you do that, it's a huge success, pretty much, with that role. I mean, I listened to my heroes singing Siegfried, like Wolfgang Windgassen, on both the Böhm recording and the Schulte recordings, and some of the live ones. That's my ideal. It's beautiful lyric singing of that role, and I love listening to Max Lorenz and those sort of things. Terrific. So the other things in my future, Tristan, it's, we all love the opera so much, but it's, I don't feel that my voice has the right qualities for Tristan yet. It doesn't have the, what I want in a warmth in my sound. And if I've still got height in my sound, I might as well do the other ones. And what an honour to get to do those parts. Yeah,
it's terrific. Yes,
yeah.
I'm curious too, watching you accompany yourself.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I mean, I love doing it.
That's difficult.
I thought it was a great idea, but it's terrifying.
I mean, how do you find your postural issues, your breathing issues at the piano?
That's how I practice. I'm always, so whenever I get to sit down as Zygmunt or any of these things, I'm quite at home.
Okay.
It's a different thing to stand and to sing. Obviously you invoke different moments of the body, different parts of the body. The muscles are treated in a different way. But I haven't had any problem doing a lot of my study at the piano and singing it in full voice.
Yeah. Interesting.
I mean, I love doing it. Instead of going to the movies, I will say, today I'm going to sing first act Parsifal, and I'm going to sing everyone's part. I love doing that. I love it. Everyone from the Erste Knappe, down to Gornemans.
So you could always get work as a prompter if need be.
Wow, that job, when you see those people who do that so well, is an incredible job. My first Zygmunt at the Met, I was singing at the City Opera. I was singing in the Magic Flute, and I got called to come and have an audition at the Metropolitan Opera for the new Magic Flute as the guard. And at the very end of that audition, Ken Noda, assistant to James Devine, said, "Simon, why don't you sing a little bit of Zygmunt for us?" And I had it in the back of my folder, and I sang Ein Schwert für hieß mit der Vater that you heard. And I then got, that afternoon, it was one of those great Met stories. The phone went and it said, "Simon, you're the new cover for Placido Domingo at the Metropolitan Opera in the part of Zygmunt." I went on to cover Ben Heppner. In fact, I came to a Wagner Society meeting in the early 2000s, in the mid 2000s, where Ben couldn't come, so I came and spoke about Lohengrin. I mean, I was very spoiled with these great singers. Going back to Placido in a role like Zygmunt, I would watch him. Of course, he wouldn't be there for any rehearsals. He would only come in for the performances. But every one of those performances, I was on the side of the stage. The prompter on that occasion was Kathy Kelly, great conductor and pianist. And I can remember just watching prompters prompt Mr. Domingo is one of the great things out to see, because the man is incredible. That every line is nearly prompted. And I mean this with full respect, and he just delivers it. And it's quite extraordinary. And Kathy Kelly was extraordinary doing that.
She's terrific. Yes.
Yes.
She is.
Yeah.
Terrific. Well, I think we could go on and on about technique forever. It's such a fascinating subject, and I think for non-singers, what goes into singing, what goes into developing a voice, especially on your level, is tremendous. Every bit as much as goes into an instrumentalist or any other art form. There's a tremendous amount in that process, and you've articulated that, I think, really beautifully. Going back a bit to your origins and things I think people would be interested in, especially one question I have, how do you cope with long absences from home? You're home how often during the year? How long? 2-3 months?
Well, at 2 months at the most. I've got good managers who are getting me great work around the globe, and I mean, my wife is a very good lawyer, and I came first to New York City here in 1996. So I do proudly regard myself as an American singer, even though I don't sound like one. But I've been here off and on since 1996 for at least 8 years, solidly studying and living here in New York. And we got used to it. My wife was in London. And then we had 3 kids really, really quickly, twins, which has changed the dynamic quite. So I miss them very much. So at least here in New York, I can be in my Met dressing room, getting my makeup on, and Skype them while they're having their breakfast the next morning in New Zealand. So it does work. I'm going to see them for a week next week. It's great. I do 22 trips around the world each year. And sometimes I turn left on the plane and most often I turn right, and I just keep on walking right to the back. And people ask me, well, how can you go all the way to New Zealand in economy class? Well, I say, it only takes another 3 glasses of champagne in the lounge. And then I don't care where I sit, usually. Yeah, but it is hard. But, you know, I was able to take my family to Bayreuth the first 2 years. We drove from London, and the children went to the little kindergarten on the Green Hill right beside the festival house. So yeah, they've been immersed in it. It's been very cool.
You make it work.
Yeah, we make it work.
And
yeah.
Yes, I do recall in the cafeteria in Bayreuth, you're greeting your children and how are you, darling, and how are you doing over Skype.
Over the Skype, you know, I live on Skype and FaceTime and those sort of things. It's great technology.
Yeah, terrific. And I noticed too that you're a quite generous patron to arts organizations in New Zealand. Can you tell us a little bit about some of your projects there, the boys choir and the other, and the what did you say, the Singing Teachers Society?
Yeah, well,
it's very interesting to know.
It's a great honor to be considered for these positions, patron sometimes, and the boys choir. I look back, you know, I never was brought up in a choral house. We were just a normal New Zealand farming house. My mother was a school teacher, but then so I'm a patron of the choir, and I love going and singing for the boys. They can hear it up close. It's a visceral aspect for them. But the greatest honour for me, the Singing Teachers of New Zealand, NewZats, said, "Would you be our patron?" Which was a great honour. And most patrons in New Zealand are either Dame Kerry or Sir Donald, so it was lovely to get a few in those. And I love being involved with a lot of those things in New Zealand, you know.
Terrific.
Because, you know, my voice keeps on going for another 10 or 15 years singing this great repertoire, and I'll be very happy, you know, when I'm mid-50s to go back to New Zealand and become Professor of Voice one day. But until then, I'm just going to keep on singing as much as I can.
On singing.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about the postage stamp, the Simon O'Neill postage
Well, all my American friends are always interested about that, because you cannot be on a postage stamp in this country if you're not dead, of course. The big debate still is about the Elvis postage stamp. But back in 1997, there was a postage stamp that came out, and I'm on that stamp. It's a peculiar story, but in the end I got upgraded from just being in the booklet, and I do have it on the last line of my biography. This is a little quirky morsel of interest, but my mother has 100 of them on the wall, framed. And I mean, at the time I sent letters all around the place, just with no letter in them, just seeing if... yeah, so that's the truth. I mean, yeah.
PR is PR, I guess.
Yeah.
I know I'm certainly eager to hear you sing a bit more if you'd like to.
Yeah, I'd love to.
To close out, we'd just like to sit here and enjoy your wonderful music making.
Well, look, I bought a few of my favorite roles, and I talked a wee bit about, you know, the Zygmunt and the Lohengrin, but the role of late that I've been performing is Parsifal. I got to perform that at Covent Garden at the end of last month, and I performed it with Scott in Bayreuth in the Stefan Herheim production. It's the most beautiful production, in fact, the greatest production I've ever been involved with or seen on stage. I would say that even to many directors that I respect greatly. The Stefan Herheim Parsifal was so glorious to be involved with, conducted by Daniele Gatti. The last production we did at Covent Garden I loved very much too, and I think it's going to come out on the DVD or something next month. But if I can sing Parsifal for the rest of my life, I'll be a very happy chap. I'm going to Switzerland in 2 weeks to sing Parsifal, and I just thought I'd sing you a little bit of the second act, if it's okay, and then I thought I'd sing the third act of Siegfried and just finish with the whole third act, every part of Götterdämmerung. But I must say to the Wagner Society, this does bother me in these Peters editions, which the Met does use in many places. It has a shocking spelling mistake on our favourite chord, in the very middle of Parsifal, of course, this chord, we all know that chord, but here is the Tristan chord as Kundry kisses Parsifal. You know, people ask me, well, when you sing Parsifal, at that moment when Kundry actually kisses you, I feel it like it's a, you know, we all have computers now, and when you put your phone into the computer or a flash drive, the amount of information that's immediately absorbed onto that drive, and that's what I feel happens to Parsifal in my own little head. That immediately he has an upload of what has happened to Amfortas, and he sees it happening to him with Kundry. And that's when he screams out Amfortas die Wunder. So in this edition, which I love very much, it's spelled incorrectly. Ersten Kurs. That's a bit too jazzy for the Tristan chord, isn't it? I mean, it's spelled just wrong. I'm going to write to them. Anyway, it's supposed to be an E sharp at the bottom. Ersten Kurs. There it is. I'll just cut a wee bit. Religious person, but I was brought up, as a normal little Catholic boy. But when I sing this, in this moment here, I see why people are. I see why people have faith. I have faith. I'm the Wagnerian disciple here, I guess. My brother-in-law is a monk in the Vatican in Rome, and he comes to Parsifal, and he has a full-on experience in it. He loves that thing. But this moment when he is describing the chalice, it's glorious to be on stage singing this with an orchestra.
Deshalb
love that music so much. I mean, I know we all do, but
I don't know that there's really much one can say, honestly. I am, personally speaking, absolutely blown away that you can sing like that seated at a piano. It really is so impressive,
Oh,
and
Scott,
it brings back wonderful memories of the Herheim production. And
it was great, wasn't
it
it, Scott? I mean,
terrific, wonderful in every way. And even though you were rather strategically hit by Kundry, shall we say anatomically, but that it was very effective. It was extremely effective. And I think we're drawing to a close here, but I know we could go on for hours. I could go on for hours
I literally
hearing
could.
you.
I'm like a walking jukebox. Terrible.
No, it's wonderful. It's wonderful.
I'm sorry about the casual nature of the evening, but
No,
I love speaking casually about it. Yeah.
So I think we'll have then an end to the evening. Natalie has a presentation to make on all our behalf.
Wagner Society of New York honors Simon O'Neill, a great Helden tenor, March 19th, 2014.
Natalie, thank you, darling. Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, lovely. How beautiful. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to come. And it was a real, just a joy. It's a lovely, because Wozzeck is such a happy opera. It was nice to be able to come in and talk a little bit about, hopefully, little snippets of discussions in singing Wagner that you often don't hear. Sometimes I hope a little bit. I just love coming here, and I do love singing the great master very much. And if my career stops tomorrow morning, I'll pat myself on the back and think, boy, you had some great times singing these things. So with to be in the pit and see Mr. Levine there, or Mr. Barenboim Papano, who I just can't believe I've had the honor to do that. Telemann. We've got stories out the left, right, centre on all these various productions and stuff, but we'll leave those for another night, I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was terrific.